Hello everybody, my name is Richard Zoltik and I'll be providing the video tutorials for this portion of the program. Today we're going to be looking at dimensioning, but before we go into dimensions, I've gone ahead and added all of the plumbing components for the bathroom. I've also included the windows, the doorways, and what looks to be an outer finish of the walls. So there are two different ways of doing dimensions. We can use annotative dimensioning, which requires us to dimension within a viewport, or we can use layer dimension and actually control the dimension scale itself. Either way, we have to go through a process where we create all the settings so that our dimensions look proper. Now, when we begin, I'm going to click on the annotation icon, which pulls down the menu, which also includes dimensioning. And here, just click on the icon that looks like a dimension with a paintbrush. That means we can modify it. I've got a number of ones that I've used in the past that I've got in here. You have standard and annotation. So we're going to create a new dimension style. So before we do so, we select standard. And from standard, we're going to click on new. And what AutoCAD needs to do is it needs to copy an existing style, and then we can make all the changes to it. So this new style, we're going to create a 1/2 inch scale version, so 1/2 inch. And I'm just going to type that as the new style name. It doesn't matter what you type it. It can be anything you want as long as you recognize it. I use a different numbering system because I use the actual ratio values of the dimensions. And I will have to explain that to you because there is part of the menus that we have to adjust accordingly. But let's say 1/2 inch and we select continue. And when you do this, you're going to be getting a new dimension style menu, which looks like this. And we have to adjust this according to the new style that we're going to be using. And there's all sorts of values here to adjust. Now, you're at this point, stay at this point. I'm actually going to call up one that I've already created for the purposes of this program. And these are the numbers that we're going to have to change in order to affect our drawing in the correct manner. So the first thing we're going to go to, even though there's a number of tabs here, is symbols and arrows. And there's a few things we have to adjust here first. In this section, we're going to adjust how the arrowheads look. Now they're called arrowheads, but they can be anything. They can be ticked, dots, original indicators. All these different styles are all called arrowheads. We use architectural ticks because it's the simplest style that we can use when you have a complex set of dimensions. It's easy to read. For leaders, that's when you label things and you're pointing to things, we used a typical closed arrowhead. So the two are distinctive on our drawing. So under symbols and arrows, select architectural ticks, select an arrowhead size of 3/32 of an inch. Now, for center marks, we don't have any in our particular project, but what this indicates is actually how it will look if we go and put a radial dimension in the case of an arc or a circle. And this indicates how the center point will look. None means exactly what is shown here, nothing. Mark will actually have a little cross, and lines will have a little cross with extension lines that go beyond the edge of the arc or the circle. Just leave that the way it is. For break size, we're not going to be using that. Just leave it as 1/8 of an inch. The arc length, again, nothing to do with arcs or we're going to adjust. We'll just leave this menu exactly as is. So the only thing it really changed was to make sure it says architectural ticks. Now, if for whatever reason this does not have some of these options, we have to make sure that we're dimensioning using architectural units. Now, usually by default, when you type in units in architectural, the primary units here say architectural. Now, in the rare case that it doesn't, I've just gone to this menu. Most of you will not have to adjust anything. However, if it doesn't say architectural here, but it says decimal, switch it to architectural. And then change the precision level to a 16th. Now, 16th is more than what we need, but we typically use a precision value slightly finer than what's required for the diagram. And it allows us to check the dimensional values at a finite level, and it just makes it easier to find errors. Fractions are diagonal, so what's the difference here? Diagonal is on an angle, whereas if you look in this menu, you also have horizontal, which is basically one on top of the other. We'll leave it as diagonal. Round off values, just leave as is. If we were using metric dimensions, we would have a suffix with the letter m for meters, 2m's for millimeters, and so on. Scale factor we'll leave as 1. Now, zero suppression refers to how a dimension is viewed. If you have a dimension, let's say that is 4 inches, if you remove this, it will say 0 feet 4 inches. If you leave this on, it will simply say 4 inches. Same with the other one. When you look at inch values, if I had a dimension that was exactly 1 foot 0 inches, it would only show 1 foot. But we want to make sure that we show the inch value to make sure it says 1 foot 0 inches, so there's no chance for error. Angular dimension we're not going to be dealing with, so just leave as is. Let's go into lines. Under lines, a lot of this information we leave as is, which simply means that we're going to allow the dimension layer to dictate the color of it. Dimensioning blocks, which are how the dimension is inserted. It's actually inserted as a block, and which has multiple components. So we'll leave this always as by block and by block for line type, line weight, and color. The extend beyond ticks is a 1/16 of an inch. So what does that mean? We have to first understand what the different components are. We have the text information, the number. We have extension lines, so they come from the object. And what we do is we select 2 points on the object, and these lines extend the object. The gap outside the object are these spaces right here, because we actually select the object and then it leaves a space there. The dimension line is, in this case, horizontal. It's the same length as the object that we're dimensioning. The ticks are obviously where the extension meets the dimension. The point here where it says extension beyond ticks, that means this extension line goes past the tick. All right. And then baseline spacing refers to a gap when we have multiple dimensions on top of each other. So down below extension lines, what are we referring to here? Again, the colors leave as is. Extend beyond the dimension line. So the first one in here, extend beyond ticks, refers to the dimension line going past the extension. This one is the extension line going past the dimension line. That's the difference. So they're both at a 1/16 inch value. So there's your offset from origin. So I'll click on this point, I'll set my dimension line, and it automatically leaves me a gap. The fixed length simply means that if I move this dimension line past 3/8 of an inch, the actual extension lines, this gap will follow me and it becomes larger. Now that's 3/8 of an inch on a printed page, on an actual layout page, not in the actual dimension of the image. And I'll try to clarify that later on. So our lines are set, dimension lines, extension lines. Our ticks are set, our arrowheads are set. The numbers are correct here. Text, this is where we identify how the numbers are going to display. Now we're just going to use a standard style text. If we had different text styles, then we can pick one of them, but we'll just use standard size. The color will be by block or by the layer that it's on. The text height is 3/32 of an inch. So from the top of the 0 here to the bottom of 0 in here, in the final print format, if you take a scaled rule, you can actually measure it. It's 3/32 of an inch. Fractional height refers to how big the fractions are relative to the numbers. So in this case, it's 0.75 or 75% of the height of the number. So that 11, that 1, is 0.75 in height relative to the 1 foot value. And it's usually between 0.75 or 0.8. We don't want to frame around any of the numbers. Now, text placement is important because it refers to a discipline. In our discipline, we want to always have the numbers above. Okay, and so here we have it above the dimension line, above the dimension line. We want it centered between the extension lines. And we read things left to right, left to right. And the offset from the dimension line is 1/8 of an inch. That's the gap between the dimension line and where the text sits. We always want to have the text align with the dimension line. That's critical. So all these elements must be exactly as I've shown here for your dimensions to look like mine. The fit value. Okay, So there's certain rules that are applied when we dimension, one of them being that the number must fit within the two extension lines. If it doesn't, it pops out and it has a leader line, all this. What we're trying to do is force certain events to occur to make sure that they meet our particular discipline. So we always want the text in between the extension lines, even if it doesn't fit in between them, because that allows us to adjust it. And we always want to make sure that that dimension line, if our text pops out because it doesn't fit it, we don't want a leader. We don't want extra lines to point to where these dimensions are. So usually with these two options, we have the most flexibility in moving it if it's not quite right, and I'll show you later on how we actually do it. We're going to use, in this case, the scale factor. Later on in one of the other dimensioning styles I'll show you, we'll use annotative. Annotative refers to it automatically adjusts based on the viewport scale, and it will reflect that viewport scale. So here we're going to affect the scale by picking 24. Now what does that mean? So our scale for this drawing is 1/2 inch equals 1 foot. It's a ratio. So if a 1/2 inch equals 12 inches, 1 inch equals 24 inches. And that's what CAD understands. So the ratio is 1 to 24, and that's why this value is 24. Now there are charts you can look up on the internet that have all of these conversion factors. You'll notice at the bottom of CAD it will give you all sorts of scale factors, and we'll look at that later on. We always want to draw a line between extension lines. It's this one here. Now you'd say, well, why do they have that option? If the two extension lines are too close together, it won't draw that line. So we want to make sure it's always there. So that's basically all we need here through this whole setup. Make sure it's identical and we're ready to dimension. Now in here, in my case, I've modified it. In your case, what we're going to do is set it current. So you pick the one you want. That's the one you just made. In my case, it's called DIM24. I'm going to set that current and then click on close. So I'm going to use a dimension layer to help me with dimensioning here. And I'm going to dimension some of the items here. The nice thing about dimensions is it actually checks the quality of your work. So if you have an error in something, it means that you need to edit your drawing, not change the dimension. Okay, so how does this work? We're going to be focused on the secondary menu. So make sure you have that shown here. So under this tab, make sure it says show menu bar. Okay, mine says hide because it's already shown. And I want to start with dimension and linear. Now we always start with either linear or a line. That's the first dimension of a dimension string. And a dimension string is just a row of dimensions. A line is only used for anything that's not horizontal or vertical. So we're going to start with linear. And we always start at one end of the drawing and work towards the other. So I'm going to start down here, click on my first point. Now you'll notice it's looking for endpoint because I've got my snap setting to endpoint. And therefore it's going to find it as my first point. I click on my second point and then I move my cursor over. Now I'm going to zoom in while I'm doing this so you can see this. Notice if I go beyond a certain point, it stays a certain length. Those extension lines don't change because I set it to 3/8 of an inch. So I want it just above the drawing, so I have a gap here. Perfect. And now that I've done my first dimension, I'll continue on with the string of dimensions. So I'm going to go into dimension, continue. And we pick the center line here of the actual shower head, the edge of the shower. The next one is the center of the sink. Okay, I'm going to press Shift right mouse key and select center. And it should pick out the center of the drain because that's critical for the plumber to know exactly where that is. And then I'll hold down Shift right mouse key, center. You'll notice that I don't have to start where I was before. Continue says, hey, continue going on from the previous dimension as its last dimension point is the first dimension of the next one. Okay, so I'm going to go to this one, Shift right mouse key, select center. This is an unusual geometry. I can't find the center. So how else can I find it? If you can't, use the geometric center option. See if that will find it. If not, you can try quadrant. See if that will find it. Okay. And in my particular case, I can also use midpoint. Okay, midpoint will find the center of all these, which will be the same as the center of this. So sometimes when we insert a drawing, it doesn't have a geometric center, maybe because it's a three-dimensional object. There's all sorts of reasons why, but you've got to find the center of this drain, okay? And then the last dimension here, we have two more. We have the edge of the inner wall and then the outer edge of the wall. So at this point, you can check all your dimensions to make sure it reflects what's in the actual drawing itself. But let's say that there was an error in here. Let's say, for instance, this number was incorrect. Well, what we can do is we can stretch things or move things around. But when we move things, we want to include the dimension by using stretch. Okay, what do I mean that? I'm going to click on modify and I'm going to select stretch. When I select stretch, I'm going to put a window around these two sinks in the cabinetry, and or the vanity, and you'll see that all the dimensions highlight. Why? Because they're nodes. What we picked to actually make the dimension is within that stretch section. So now when I end stretch and I click to start my base point, all the dimensions will effectively move with that object, which saves us from redimensioning everything. Now in my case, everything's correct, so I'm going to just press escape and leave it where it is. But that's the advantage of making sure that you draw correctly and you dimension correctly to the right points. Okay, let's do this horizontal string. I'm going to select linear, click my first point, click my second point, move that so that it's above. Notice one leg's different from the other, and until I get at the right distance, then they're both the same length. That's what I want here. I want to do the window, so there was my linear dimension, my first one. I'm going to go into dimension, continue, and from here I'm going to pick all the other dimensions for this particular item and go along here and here. And what else do they have here? Looks like they've got the interior wall selected for the dimension string. Great. And the frame of the window here, frame of a window here, the width of this part of the wall, and then the final dimension. So I clicked all those and then I press enter and I've completed my dimension string. Perfect. Now notice I started on the left, went to the right. I could have gone the other way around. Doesn't matter which direction you go in as long as it's from one end to the other. Now I want to pick up on the 7 foot 5.5 inch dimension, but I want to make sure that I gap it the right space. I don't want just these dimensions at any sort of space value, so I don't want it way up here. I want to make sure I have that 3/8 inch value between dimensions. So how do we do that? Okay, go into dimension. This time select baseline. Now you notice at the bottom you have a couple of options. One is select. So I'm just going to click on it, or you can type in S and enter. And I'm going to pick this line, because this line will be the base of the 7.5 inch dimension. When I click on this line, and I go to the next point, which is this line. Okay. Notice that the 7.5 inches has already determined where the dimension line is going to be. I'm going to press enter, but notice it wants to make the next one above it and the next one above it. That's a baseline dimension. I'm just going to click these different locations so you can see how it repeats itself. Press enter. So each one of these gaps is 3/8 of an inch using baseline dimensioning. All right. Now I only want the 7.5 one, so I'm going to press escape and I'm going to click on this one and click on this one and press delete. So whenever we want to do a next row of dimensioning, we're going to click on dimension, baseline. With baseline, I want to select a dimension that I want to start it with, pick the next dimension. Now I made a mistake, but that's okay. I'm going to show you how to correct it. The next one is this point here, and then I press enter. Now notice I picked the wrong spot to begin with. That's okay. How do we edit this? I'm going to press escape because I'm still in baseline dimension. See, it says select baseline. I press escape. I'm going to click on the dimension that's incorrect. And what I'm going to do with this is simply adjust it. Notice what it has, these nodes, these little square boxes. Those are adjustable points. So where I started this dimension was here. I don't want it there. I want it here. So I pressed no command whatsoever. I just clicked on the box and then I moved it to its right location. And we can do the same with numbers, and we can do the same with other objects. And I'm going to show you this later on the right side of the drawing as well. Okay, what about the toilet here. We want to center line the toilet in this particular case. I'll select linear. Remember, we always start with linear angular. Click my first point. See if it's got a center point on this one. Yep. Ooh, that number's weird. Look at that. 1 foot 6 and 11/16. Let's see if we can adjust that. And then I'm going to continue, dimension, continue, and move on. Okay, so at any given time, don't stop your dimensioning. Continue dimensioning it, and then we can add it at a different time. Now, it should have been where? 1 foot 6. Where is it? 1 foot 6 and 11/16. It's just slightly off, but it's still off. So I'm going to select offset, type in 1 foot 6, click on the line, click on the side. That's where the toilet was supposed to be. So if I click on the toilet and select move and move it, where am I moving it from? I'm moving it from the center to that line. Notice that the dimensions automatically picked up because of where I had dimensioned that object, and it knows to follow it. Remember what I said, don't stop dimensioning, just keep dimensioning, then edit your drawing. Now I'm going to remove this temporary construction line. Perfect. And let's see what other dimensions I have here. Linear. Now, typically we start with this menu, but you'll notice that linear is here. Do not use this one. It creates multiple types of dimensions. And what we want to do is stick with the ones that we're learning and we understand exactly what they do. So click on linear, pick my 2 points. There's my 4-inch value. Good. Dimension, continue, go to the next point, go to the next point, press enter, and those are all correct. Super. What about these interior dimensions? There's a couple of different strings of interior dimensions that we have here. So let me start on the right side, I'll go to the left. So linear, there's my first point, second point, move it out. Good, 4.5. Dimension, continue. And I'll just click the points as they're shown on the screen. Now remember, with doors, you do the inside casings. With windows, you do the outside casings. And it looks like this one's included and that. And now I can zoom out and verify. Just press escape once you finish your dimension string. Verify all those values. Now the other thing we can do here, because sometimes there's crowding, and you can see how the 4.5 may be interfering with these dimension lines. Typically when we print in black and white, and sometimes this interference is unacceptable. If I click on a dimension, right on the 5 points where we picked it, this refers to the dimension line, I can click on the number and I can move it. And notice it doesn't have a leader, where we said don't include a leader. So I may want to have that point. Okay. What I want to be careful of is going too low in some of the larger dimensions, because if I go too low with them, it actually breaks the dimension line. Let me do that with this one in here. Hold on. Press escape. I'm going to click on it and move it lower. See, it breaks the dimension line in here. If that ever happens, just right click on one of these or just move your mouse over top of it and said reset text location, and I'll put it where it should be. So we can adjust the text after we've dimensioned things quite easily. What else do we have here? Let me do the next wall in here. So linear. Here we go from here to, it looks like the inside of that wall. And it's somewhere here. 6, 1 1/4. Ooh, I got something wrong there. I'll fix that, not to worry. Dimension, continue. And this is 4-inch. And where do they have this one? Here to there. Yep, 3 foot 6. This should be 6 foot 4. Okay. Remember, the dimensioning is correct. Okay. We don't adjust that because of a 1/4-inch differential, because the dimensioning is correct. Our drawing, or a drawing we're looking at and repeating, may in fact be incorrect. Now, let's take a look at this here. This shower wall has a certain dimension to it, and I'm going to go from here to here and move up, and then dimension, continue, move to here. And here I notice right away, oh, it should have been 4 foot 7.5 with a 2 foot 10 gap, but it's actually 5 feet. How do I fix that? All right, simplest technique, offset. Pick the easier of the two numbers, 2 foot 10 here, And I'm going to use this line as a temporary construction line. There we go. Now, easy here, we're just going to use stretch, modify, stretch. I start on the bottom right or the top right, and I move to the left. And what I want to do is include what I want to move. There's the line I want to move. These are the two lines and the line here that I want to stretch. And I go right over top of the dimension, so that's all included. Click. Good. I don't want to pick anything else. I press enter, and then I'll pick the object, click, and where it's supposed to go to. Click. And now those two dimensions line up with the project. Stretch is an amazing command, but it requires some finesse. You have to practice it in order to fully understand it. You see how quickly I can correct the drawing just by using stretch. Okay, let's see about the other numbers that I have in here. I'm going to select linear, pick the edge of the window frame. It goes to the edge of the vanity here. Move that over. It says 5'4". Yeah, that's correct. And dimension, continue. This is the length of the vanity, 6'2". That one's correct, and the other one's 1 foot 1¼ I'm going to click on that, and what do I have here? 1 foot 1¼ Look at the way these numbers are interfering with one another. Once again, I can click on a dimension, click on the node, move it over. I went too far down. One way to avoid that is actually make sure you're holding down shift, so when you're moving something, okay, it's moving perfectly horizontally or vertically, and that way I avoid any sort of errors like that where it actually will come down too low and break the line. There we go. So those dimensions all look fine. There's one more that's missing in this particular case, and that's the width of the cabinetry. And there is that final dimension. So dimensioning, make sure you have the right values with the dimensioning style. Like I said, I didn't use annotative. I dimensioned it with a particular style. Make sure you have an independent layer for your dimensions so everything comes out correctly. And remember, the drawing needs to be edited when the dimensions that come up are incorrect. So we don't edit the dimension and change the number. We edit the drawing to match the number it's supposed to be.